Hello plant friends, my name is Victoria and you're watching Plantastics. Today we are with my Alocasia Cuprea Red Secret. It is my largest alocasia and I've done a lot of trial and error with my alocasias. In this video I'm going to be talking about that and how I got this one to be humongous. So I like buying my alocasias teeny tiny. So that's what I did with this one. When I first purchased it, it had just 2 leaves and I was able to get it to grow quite a good bit in the time that I've had it. So I had it on my back porch. I know I've told all of y'all this before, but we had a drought while I was away and all of my alocasias and all of my outside plants got the worst case of spider mites I have ever seen. Every alocasia survived, but it was quite a journey to get from literally dying, riddled with spider mite damage, to this. So it can be done. Don't be discouraged, even though it is incredibly emotionally taxing because you really think your whole collection's gonna die. Anyway, so we're just gonna take a look-see at this one. So I've got 4 pretty large leaves, with this one being the very largest. I went from having kind of small leaves to having this one, and it was really a shock, and I was like, wow, I must actually be doing something right. I had this one in a self-watering pot, which I will show you more later, and it put out this leaf, and I was just like, yes, I was literally celebrating so much. So that was my first really big leaf, and it's literally larger than my head. And then I have these other 3 leaves as well. And one of the reasons I love the Cuprea is that it has these leaves and they look like metal. It doesn't have the craziest lobes. The backs of the leaves are this dark, deep, dark burgundy somewhat color, bordering on fuchsia. It's kind of fun. And the backs of the leaves to me are just as beautiful as the fronts. And you can see how they connect to the back of the leaf. It's just straight on. So I have 4 leaves, as you can see. And then I have 2 more leaves that are coming up here from the center. So alocasias grow their leaves from the center, and you can kind of see them sometimes forming long before they actually start to come out. The leaves are super soft when they are unrolling, so do not touch them. And even though they're just so pretty and they're so soft, like, don't touch them once they're like out like this as well. When they're still hardening off, they're still super delicate. I'm going to try to find a spot so you can see that this one kind of got touched when it was hardening off and it just has a little bit of damage. So just be very careful. Like, you can literally just bump it and it'll just leave a mark on the leaf. This one, honestly, I like to purchase all of my plants as tiny plants simply because they're so much cheaper. And also they get to acclimate in my house or in my environment. And I just feel like they do so much better than the medium to large size plants of the same exact variety. And it's because they get a chance to like acclimate more so. Whereas when you get an adult or more mature plant and you take it from their greenhouse to the shipping container to your home, they undergo so much more stress. And I just honestly have found in my experience that the smaller plants just acclimate better. I think it's because they just have less to lose. Be sure to tell me your experiences in the comments if you find that to be true. It's also something I do to kind of save some money because the baby plants are just so much more like budget friendly. When the newer leaves are coming out, they have way more red in them. And it's really remarkable and very unique and specific kind of to this variety. So as you can see, there's a lot of white in this soil mix. Prior to this mix, I used orchid bark and Miracle-Gro soil, and I mixed it kind of 50-50 because that was what I had to make a chunky mix. I was able to find some perlite in my local hardware store, so I used 50-50 perlite and 50-50 Miracle-Gro. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So this plant really loved that before, so I kind of just mixed in the perlite because I didn't have any orchid bark at the time. So that's the soil that I'm using. And then you can also notice that this plant has a view spot basically for you to see how much water is in there. And this plant has a wick. So I just recently repotted this one, so the rooted moment is not as intense. But when I was repotting it, I had so many corms. I literally was shocked because, first of all, I didn't realize that Cuprea corms were like pink. Like, you can visibly distinguish them from other corms if you have them all in a big box together. I had literally a heyday picking them all off. It was like an Easter egg hunt, and I just like hit the jackpot. I love repotting alocasias and finding tons of corms. I think that's a really great sign that your plant has everything that it needs and a little bit extra, because when they have extra energy, they put that into reproducing and basically creating these mini tiny baby plants. I've also had it bloom, not one, but 2 inflows at one time. And the first inflow came out with a really big leaf. It was one of the leaves that are here right now. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because I like honestly didn't know really what was going on. I was like, wow, that is a huge leaf. And I'd never had an alocasia bloom before. So of course I attempted to pollinate it. And unfortunately, though I did have 2 inflows at the same time, I wasn't able to use the pollen. And another thing is, the pollen is really weird. It's like if you got baking powder and pine sap together. Like, I got it on my fingers and tried to pollinate it that way, and it was kind of like stuck on my fingers. So I really encourage you use like a paintbrush or something, or use gloves. But anyways, I did try, and then once I pollinated it, the like inflows turned down, and I left them like that for quite some time. And then the berries didn't really turn any crazy like color. The berries turned from like green to white, and then they looked like they were going to dry up. So I just took that as they were not successfully pollinated. So I kind of cut the inflows off after they started like shriveling up, and let the plant just put out more leaves. So something that you can do with your plants, if you didn't know this, is you can put them in a state of like putting out inflows or putting out flowers. And you can do that 2 ways. You can do that with your fertilizer, or you can do that with the grow lights that you're using. I have an entire video dedicated to grow lights. Actually, I have 2 videos dedicated to grow lights if you're interested, and I will link those here. So that is for grow lights. If you're interested, you can do that. So this alocasia did the best once I moved it under some stronger grow lights, actually. I put it under my larger par 38s, but really far away from them. And that's when I started getting all these super large leaves. They will have 1 or 2 leaves at a time with some weaker grow bulbs, but if you really want them to look impressive, use some stronger lights. So I've talked about the soil and I've talked about lighting. Next is the most important part, watering and fertilizing. So if you really want your plants to take off and thrive, you need to fertilize regularly. So you can create a schedule, you can put it on your Google Calendar. As long as it gets done, that's all that really matters. So every fertilizer is going to have a recommendation for how much to mix. Depending on your country, it could be so many drops per liter or so much per gallon. I live in America, so we use gallons. So the combination that I use is the Schultz foliage. It comes in a kind of larger container and it's green. I'll link it in the description box below. And then I also use SuperThrive. So SuperThrive is actually not a fertilizer. It is for minerals and other things that plants need. And I've been using it literally on all of my plants, and I've noticed a huge difference. Both of these things are not incredibly expensive, and it's super easy to just add into your routine. So with this alocasia, it's in a self-watering container. So what I do is I make my solution, I put in my Schultz, I put in my SuperThrive, and what I do is I just fill the reservoir with that gallon of that mixture. So this typically empties and is like absorbed by the plant every 2 weeks. Something that you need to keep in mind is honestly, this is like a personal preference, but I've had greater success this way. So when you first repot a plant and you put it into a wicking container, first of all, make sure the pot size is not too large. And second, you don't want to leave this full. You kind of want to leave it like at the bottom, and like bottom as in the bottom centimeter of the pot. You do not want there to be that much water when you first repot it. And the reason is the plant hasn't had a chance to create and establish a root system. And what you're going to run the risk of is root rot. So just allow it to dry out in between waterings until that plant has a chance to establish a root system. So that could be anywhere from a month to 2 months, depending on your plant. I think I repotted this one like 2 months ago or a month or two ago. So I know that it's good and it can take, that much. But just be cautious, especially if you removed or accidentally lost a lot of roots, because the plant's just going to take a little while to put those back. So every time I water, I'm mixing a gallon of distilled water with that SuperThrive and that Schultz, and that's what I'm putting in here. So the plant is able to produce these large leaves and tons of corms and inflows, and do really well because I'm providing it with adequate light, which honestly is medium light, and I'm also feeding it. So that's what you really want to do if you want to have these impressive alocasias. Like, I've seen some people with these huge alocasias, and yes, they talk about lighting and they talk about soil, but fertilizing is just as important as those other two things. And if you're doing really great in those two areas by providing a really nice draining mix, and you're also providing adequate light, but you're just not seeing the growth that you want, try fertilizing regularly. In spring and summer, you want to do it every 2 weeks. I literally make that mixture every time I go to water my plants. You want to use a synthetic fertilizer if you have wicks. If you use organic, you're going to clog the wicks. So I use the Schultz on anything with a wick, and then I use the Miracle-Gro organic on everybody else. And I pretty much put both of those in sprayers and spray. And I do that so I don't disturb the roots, and also I can get the entire area around the root ball saturated with that without like completely flooding the pot. And then something else that's really important if you are fertilizing regularly is you're going to want to flush the pots. And that's super easy. You're basically just going to run some water and allow it to drain through the bottom. And that's just going to prevent mineral buildup. Now, if you are like fertilizing smaller enclosed spaces like terrariums, you've got to use organic because it prevents a buildup of those minerals and salts in the root system. Obviously, the one behind me doesn't have a drainage area, so I'm not able to drain it out. But yeah, fertilizer is very, very important. So be sure to fertilize your plants. So if you have any questions or if you have a favorite alocasia, be sure to comment below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like. If you'd like to see future videos from my channel, be sure to subscribe. And if you don't want to miss another one of my videos, be sure to click the bell button so that way you can be notified of every time that I post a video. If you'd like to hang out for a little bit longer, I'm going to include some videos here. Until then, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.